So let's, of course, review the basis of the distinction between the empiricist approach to knowledge versus the rationalist approach to knowledge. Okay, the key distinction being the origin of our ideas. For the rationalists, there are a priori ideas. As we saw in Descartes, we have two such a priori ideas in the strict sense of innate, an idea of self and an idea of God. And from those two innate ideas, which are a priori, Descartes is able to demonstrate subsequent proofs, subsequent ideas, which are founded upon those a priori ideas. So, of course, despite the fact that as a rationalist, like Plato, Descartes maintains that all knowledge is ultimately grounded in something purely intelligible or a priori, okay, the knowledge of self and the knowledge of God, which guarantee, through the employment of his fourth meditation strategy of avoiding error, we come to the knowledge of other things in the world. Most of our knowledge of the world, even for Descartes, is given through the senses. But before I can lend credibility to what my senses teach me, first I must establish the basis for doing so, which is my belief in God as a non-deceptive creator. The empiricists, by contrast, maintain that all knowledge originates a posteriori. There are no a priori ideas in the strict sense of innate. Rather, he likens the mind to a blank sheet of paper. When we come into the world, the mind is blank and remains that way until it is written upon. And it is written upon by our sensations. Okay? However, in addition to sensation, Locke says there is another origin of ideas. And what does he call that? There is sensation.
Reflection.
Yeah. And there is reflection. Okay. So by sensation, what Locke means is the power that things possess to cause ideas in the mind. So when Locke talks about qualities belonging to things or objects, he means powers that those things possess to cause ideas in us. Once we have those sensory-based ideas, the mind has the power of reflecting upon those ideas, either by analyzing them and thus affirming further properties belonging to those ideas. For example, once I have the idea of a triangle given to me through sensation, I can analyze the triangle and realize that there are certain properties belonging to that geometrical shape which are eternal. Okay? So even though the mind is a blank piece of paper, or sometimes called a blank slate, a tabula rasa, it does have potential okay? But until a sensory perception imparts content to that potential, my potential reflection has nothing to work with, okay? So sensation is like downloading software to your computer's operating system, okay? Until there is some content for your computer to work with, then the operating system can't show its capabilities. All right? Likewise with the mind. Until the mind is furnished with some idea, then its powers of reflection remain dormant. Okay? Now, when it comes to reflection, not only am I capable of revealing properties belonging to the ideas furnished by sensation, but I also become aware of the powers of my mind. Okay? All right. Now, the next question that Locke deals with, and this comes from Book 2, Chapter 8, Sections 1 through 25, the second part I asked you to read, deals with how the mind receives ideas via sensation. Okay? How is it that a thing which presumably exists out there in the world is capable of producing ideas in me? Okay? Recall that he distinguishes between primary qualities of objects and secondary qualities of objects. Okay? The primary qualities of objects are what?
Shape.
Okay. Characteristics such as length and shape, maybe shape, but in his language, the primary qualities are those which are inseparable from the idea of a thing. Okay? So, I cannot possibly separate my idea of extension from the idea of the wax. No matter what I do to the wax, melt it, cut it in half, boil it, it will still have extension. And no matter how many times I subdivide that wax, no matter how small the pieces become, they will each still retain their primary qualities. They will still have extension. They will still have bulk, even if they are too small for us to sense. Okay? Now, of course, these bodies have the power of giving ideas to the mind of themselves. So I have an idea of bulk or extension, which is given to me by the power of the thing or its primary qualities. Remember that qualities or powers, which mean basically the same thing, belong to the object, whereas ideas belong to the subject. Okay? But there are also secondary qualities, such as color,
Taste.
right? Taste, fragrance, okay? So the question becomes, how does the object give rise to the idea of secondary qualities? And what's his answer? The answer is in terms of its primary qualities. Somehow, the primary qualities of an object, its bulk, its extension, its movement, transmit to the mind secondary qualities. Secondary qualities result from the primary qualities. And when the secondary qualities of an object change, such as when the wax melts, that change is attributed to a reorganization of the primary qualities. Okay? So, when the wax melts, the primary qualities, perhaps its shape, changes. Okay, it goes from a solid to a liquid, and thus produces a different secondary quality. And one of his examples is like an almond, which tastes sweet when it is eaten whole, but if it is ground up with a mortar and pestle, that change to its primary qualities gives rise to a change in its secondary qualities. What was once sweet now tastes bitter. Okay? And the primary qualities which give rise to the secondary qualities are of two types. Some of them are sensible, like the primary quality of the desk is its length, for example, and I can sense the length of the desk. But it also has primary qualities which are small, which are indiscernible by my senses. And it is those insensible primary qualities that really give rise to the secondary ones. Okay?
Like its elements, or
Yeah, maybe something like that. Okay? Amongst the primary qualities are insensible, minute particles, or, as you put it, elements, which somehow give rise to the idea in us of its secondary qualities. All right? But the thing to remember is that by qualities or powers, okay, he's referring to the object. By ideas, he's referring to the subject. Ideas are in us, qualities, and the power those qualities have to produce secondary sensations in us belong to the object. Okay? Now, if you read a bit further, he will say that we do indeed possess knowledge of three kinds of thing. I have knowledge of myself. Now that doesn't mean that I know exactly what I myself am, because I have no sensation of myself as a thinking thing. when I call myself a thinking thing, like Descartes does, he reaches that conclusion by inference. Since I imagine and sense and will, which are all modes of thinking, there must be a thing which does it. Okay? But since Locke, as an empiricist, says that there is nothing in the mind not first given in a sensation, the thing in itself, which possesses those qualities, whether it is the table which possesses the qualities of length and breadth and so forth, or the self, which possesses the qualities of its ideas, is a something I know not what. I cannot tell you exactly what the thing is in itself. All I can tell you about it is that it must exist as the basis or substratum upon which those qualities depend. Okay? And the way that I come to knowledge of things or objects is through sensation. Okay? But again, all I sense are the primary and secondary qualities, but not the thing that possesses them. Okay? That does not show itself in a sensory perception. So although Locke is still willing to affirm the existence of the thing in itself, what that thing really is remains unknown to me. Okay? I can also have knowledge of God. And he thinks that this knowledge is possible on the basis of demonstration. And his basic argument, and I'm not going to require you to know this, but his basic argument sounds much like the argument given by Parmenides prior to Socrates. Parmenides says, look, nothing comes from nothing. Okay? If something is, it must be the result of something else which is. Okay? And so since there is a world, which I know on the basis of sensation, then something must have existed from all eternity. Okay? And that's what most of us choose to call God. It doesn't matter if you call it God. You can call it whatever you want. But there must be some original thing which has always existed. It could not come into existence from nothing because nothing has no power. Okay, just like Descartes said, the principle of efficient causality states that an effect cannot surpass the reality of its cause. And if there is nothing, nothing can cause nothing. So something must have always existed.
They're not defining God as like a creator, or in the Christian sense, or any of the.
Not necessarily, no. But simply as the being that is the origin of everything. Okay? And finally, I do have knowledge of myself. And here, it sounds like he is saying almost exactly what Descartes is saying. I know that I exist through intuition. Okay? And the argument to me reads very much like Descartes' cogito. The fact that I have sensations guarantees that I exist as a thing that possesses those sensations. Okay? But just as I have no sensory perception of objects as they exist in themselves, but only know them through the sensations I receive from them. I know myself only through intuition. That is, my intuitions are of a world known to me through my ideas. And because I have ideas, there must be an I which has them. But I do not have a sensory perception of the thinking thing itself. Okay? I know that I must exist simply as the seat of sensations. But if you were to strip me of all my sensations, and therefore of all my ideas, there would be nothing there for me to identify. All right? So, while Locke is still not willing to abandon the idea of a material substance and a mental substance, he calls them something different. Instead of the material substance, he refers to incogitative being. To cogitate is to think. So there are things which do not think, which is what Descartes really meant by material substance. But Locke can't say that material substance is this or that, because he has no sensation of it. And there are cogitative beings, which is what Descartes meant by the mental or immaterial. Myself and God. Okay? Again, his basis for saying that God exists is a demonstration, a rational proof. Nothing comes from nothing, therefore something must have existed from all eternity, and that's what he calls God. Okay? All right. But let's always bear in mind that the empiricists differ from the rationalists most basically in terms of the origin of our ideas. If we never had a sensation, then the mind, for all practical purposes, would remain completely unknown to us. We know ourselves, or intuit ourselves, have a sense of ourselves, only in reference to its ideas. Okay? We distinguish the thing we must be from the ideas that we possess. Okay? So while Locke has moved away from the rationalist assertion that there really are mental substances that can be known and material substances which can be known in themselves, he still retains those ideas almost as nothing more than placeholders. Because I have sensations, those sensations must be produced by something which has the power to do so. But what that something is remains unknown. And because I have ideas, I must be something in order to possess those ideas, yet what I am in myself, as a thing in myself, also remains unknown. Okay? So we have slightly moved away from the very bold claim we find in Descartes that there are two radically different kinds of stuff that constitute the universe. All right. Now I'd like to move on to Berkeley. Okay? And as I think I mentioned to you last time, Berkeley is the philosopher that really got me hooked. Once I read Berkeley, that sent me on the path of getting a bachelor's in philosophy, 2 masters in philosophy, and a Ph.D. in philosophy. Okay? Because what he says is just so shocking and intriguing, and at some level correct, that it became obvious to me that the world is different than we think it is. It's not the way we think it is. Because the ordinary position we take is that each one of us is a real thing, and we exist in a world of objects that themselves possess a reality. Okay? Well, here's what Berkeley has in mind. Berkeley is an idealist. More specifically, he is a subjective idealist. As opposed to a realist. Locke is still a realist because although I cannot know the real inner nature either of the world or of myself, he still affirms their existence. Whether or not there is a human mind to know that world. Berkeley, for reasons we'll discuss today, denies that the world has any existence apart from our ideas. And that's the meaning of idealism. The table, the tree, the earth, your own body, all these things which the rationalists called material substances and which Locke called incogitative, for Berkeley are nothing but ideas. The whole world is only an idea. And ideas cannot exist unless they belong to a mind. Okay? He doesn't mean ideas in Plato's sense of a realm of ideal forms which can, in some fashion, exist independent of a mind. Berkeley says that what we are immediately aware of, just like Descartes said, are only our ideas. The entire content of my awareness is a collection of ideas. And again, the default position is that my ideas of the world are representative of a world which exists as a thing in itself. The thing in itself. Okay? So whether I am here to see the chair still is a real thing. that goes on existing. It's a substance. Berkeley denies the existence of material substance. There is no such thing. What we call material substances are just the ideas of extension. Okay? And since the world is nothing but an idea, and ideas must exist in a mind, then unless some mind possesses the idea of this or that, those things don't exist. So if we make reference to the old conundrum, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, of course, Descartes would probably say yes, because the tree's a real thing, okay? And it can produce sound waves. Berkeley not only would say that if there is nobody in the forest to hear the tree fall, it doesn't make a sound, but in fact there is no tree. There is no forest. And so for Berkeley, essay, or to be, is percipi, to be perceived. To be is to be perceived. The existence of the world and everything in it is completely dependent upon being perceived, which means being an idea belonging to some mind. There is no material substance. Okay? Now, of course, as Locke said, I do not have a direct idea of myself as a mind. But since I possess ideas, the mind must exist. Because there cannot be an idea unless it is contained within a mind. So for Berkeley, there are two things which exist, but they aren't mental substances and material substances. They are minds and their ideas. What do you think of that? There was a famous lexicographer, a contemporary of Berkeley. And who's a lexicographer? Someone who writes dictionaries, okay? A word specialist. Who said, or who walked up to a rock and kicked it and said, "Thus I refute ye, Berkeley." But of course, he misses the point, perhaps. Because saying that the world is nothing but an idea doesn't change anything. In fact, one of the books that Berkeley wrote is called Three Dialogues between Hylas, okay, and Philinus. Well, the Greek word hyle, Hyle, means material, body. And nous, of course, means mind. So Hylas is trying to make the case for the existence of material things, whereas Philinus is Berkeley, who is the lover of mind. Okay? And at the very beginning of the first dialogue between them, we find Philinus rejoicing about the glorious morning, the majesty of the mountains, the splendor of the colors, it's the fragrances of the flowers, talking about all the things that we sense. And he does this on purpose to make it clear to us that he is not denying that we have the experience of all these things. But what he is arguing is that it is completely unnecessary to assume that there are material things that exist in themselves as substances which are the cause of those ideas in us. For Berkeley, to say that I have an idea of the desk, but my idea is only a representation or a picture of another desk which exists out there in the world, which my idea resembles, is to unnecessarily duplicate the entire world. Why say that the world is anything other than my idea of it? Now, if you did your reading, and I'd like you to, he gives a number of really fascinating illustrations of this. Okay? For example, just as Locke had said, the warmth of a fire is a secondary quality. And for Locke, the secondary qualities are ideas that exist in the mind. Okay? And these secondary qualities for Locke are produced by a power belonging to the primary quality of the fire. The primary quality is the structure of the fire, which in some way, through its small insensible particles, give rise to the sensations of secondary qualities. Okay? But Berkeley will ask us this: if the heat of the fire as a secondary quality is not in the fire, but in us, okay? Because after all, if you hold an inanimate object up to the fire, it doesn't feel heat, okay? We feel the heat. If the heat is in us, and the heat is just a manifestation of the fire, then the fire is in us too. Or consider this. If one of your hands is ice cold and the other hand is hot, and you put them both into a bucket of water, how will the water feel to the cold hand?
Warm,
And how will it feel to the warm hand?
cool.
Right. But the same bucket of water cannot be both hot and cold at the same time. Therefore, the hot and the cold are not in the water, they are in us. And since we say that the hot and the cold belong to the water, but indeed the hot and the cold are not in the water, but in us, then the water is in us too. It is but an idea.
Is he suggesting we can manipulate our consequences of these ideas?
To an extent, what he says is that the author of the world as we sense it is God. Okay? And I believe his argument is very much like Locke's argument, that there must be an origin, an eternal origin of the world. Okay? Now, when I am having the sensation or the idea of the piece of chalk, I am sensing an idea produced by God. But if I close my eyes and imagine the piece of chalk, my idea lacks the vividness, the sharpness, the clarity that it possesses when I open my eyes and look at the piece of chalk. Now, the difference is the idea of the chalk that I have when I'm actually looking at the chalk is the idea caused by God, and God is an infinite mind, and therefore can create superior ideas. I am a finite being, and so my powers of creation, such as I exercise when I close my eyes and imagine the chalk, is inferior. I cannot create ideas with the perfection that God can create them. Okay? So while certainly I can still use my imagination in creative ways and imagine that the chalk was a different color or something, okay? That idea is inferior to the idea of a piece of blue chalk which I actually perceive. But in either case, the chalk is not out there. There is no out there. It's all up here. Think about the Matrix movies, okay? Where the entire world is virtual. And nothing is different until, of course, what's his name, Nero, discovers that he has the ability to manipulate his ideas, okay? Of course, the difference is we are not actually physical beings in some kind of a preservative solution hooked up to a virtual world producing computer.
How do you know?
Well, I guess I don't. Okay? Truly. Okay? Rather, the computer, so to speak, which is producing this world, is the mind of God. And each one of us is an individual subject receiving the ideas of a world from the mind of God. The only thing which can produce an idea is a mind. Okay? The idea of a material thing could never cause an idea. And of course, that's the problem we encountered with the mind-body dualism in Descartes. How could something physical produce something entirely non-physical, like a thought? Okay? The ordinary position, the default idea that we are subjects living in a world of objects, the latter of which produce representations of themselves within us, supposes that our ideas are an effect caused by material things. Okay? And furthermore, and I had a question on the midterm to this effect, that our ideas resemble the material things which exist in the world. Okay? So my idea of the chalk is like the chalk as it exists in itself. But Berkeley asks, how can an idea be like something which is not an idea? An idea can only be like another idea. Like my idea of the chalk is like my idea of a marker. Okay, because they are both instruments for writing. But how could an idea which is completely non-physical be like something which is radically different, material? Okay, consider another example. When you leave your house in the morning and you're at school, well, you can easily imagine your house, your apartment. And we believe, of course, that even though we're not there, that our furniture is still sitting there. The house is still existing, even though we're not present to it. What Berkeley points out is that what you have overlooked is the fact that while you are in class imagining your house, you are producing the idea of your house. It is being perceived as an idea produced by your mind. It's not as vivid as the idea you have when you are actually there, so to speak. But even being here or there is just an idea. Now notice one implication of this is that not only is the world simply ideal or an idea, but it is a subjective idea. So the world that you are perceiving is subjective. it is a private experience belonging to you. And the world that I am perceiving is a private experience belonging to me. Okay? So although we have the experience right now of being together in this space and directly communicating with one another, I see you, you see me, I hear you, you hear me. What's really going on is that God is transmitting an ideal world to your mind that runs parallel to the world he is transmitting to my mind. And we exist, all of us, in a pre-established harmony. It's as if our worlds are two reels of film, okay? And you've got your life, and I've got my life. And at a certain point in time, what happens in our individual scripts coincide. So when your life brings you to the idea of being in this room listening to me, my ideas arrive at the point when I am in this room talking to you. So we are really not interacting here. I'm having a private experience of you, which was set up at the beginning of time to coincide with your private experience of me. Pre-established harmony.
Guess it'll kind of change the definition of God again.
Well,
It's kind of weird. I don't know. I kind of feel like they should define because what they mean by God.
and I'll admit to you that, I would have to do some investigation. I'd have to go back to Berkeley's principles and reread what he says about the nature of God and his causal power to produce ideas in us. Okay? Now, of course, one major stumbling block for buying into this is that we find it very hard to believe that if to be means to be perceived, and unless something is perceived, it doesn't exist. This would suggest that when we all leave this room, the room stops existing because there's no one here to perceive it. Okay?
Is that what he's saying?
No. Because the mind of God is infinite and perceives the entirety of what is in an eternally present moment. So even if we are not in this room, the mind of God continues to perceive it. Okay? Or to generate the idea. So the continued existence of the rest of the world, even the parts of the world that are not being perceived at any given moment by a human mind, continue to exist as ideas present to the mind of God.
Should I think of it as like a fantastical, impressionate projection of ideas? Like it's just so strong that and we're not capable of it?
Right. That's right. We have powers of producing ideas. We have the power of imagination. Okay? But our imagination can only produce ideas of a certain quality. Okay? Whereas, and furthermore, I have no power of transmitting my ideas to you. We are all really trapped within our own reality.
So God is the idea. We're just a reflection of the idea. Different versions, different experiences.
No, I'm something real and you're something real. A mind. There's no body, remember, okay? Of course, we still talk about bodies. This thing is what I refer to as a body. But if what you mean by a body is a material substance which really exists, whether it is perceived or not, Berkeley says, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. Why make the extra step of saying that, okay, what I am immediately aware of are my ideas, okay? And ideas must exist in the mind. Therefore, the world exists in the mind. Why then take the extra step of saying that there is another world which is material in nature, producing ideas of itself in our minds?
Is it saying that like each person perceives a different reality?
Yes. And when there is sameness, what makes it possible for us to agree upon things, right? When you and I say, hey, we are both looking at the same table, it's just because we've been pre-programmed to have the same experience at the same time. Okay? Now, look. As far out as this sounds, consider this. First of all, there's obviously something wrong with the picture of the world left us by Descartes, where there are minds which are non-physical mental substances and bodies which are physical material substances which are completely independent of one another. Okay? Because, well, I suppose modern physics assumes and is always in pursuit of reducing everything to one basic kind of stuff, okay? Like M theory or string theory, okay? Whatever it is that I am, at bottom is the same kind of stuff or made of the same kind of stuff that the table is. The difference being the organization of those basic ingredients, okay? I mean, we talk about elements, okay? And of course, we're constantly trying to divide atoms, and an atom is just, one particle of a kind of element. So I can have an atom of hydrogen, an atom of aluminum, so forth, okay? And we smash those atoms with supercolliders to look for the subatomic particles, okay? But if we accept, for the sake of argument, that at the most fundamental level, everything that is comes from one basic or a couple of basic types of stuff. Okay? And let's just, for the sake of argument and because I have no idea what that stuff might be, let's just call it energy. Okay? I'm energy, you're energy, the desk is energy. Right? And even though when I look at the desk and try to move it or bump into it, it appears to me to be a solid, discrete thing. We know very well that what it is actually is made up of smaller parts, particles, which are constantly in motion, swirling around. Okay? And when I heat up those particles, they move faster. And if I heat them up enough, the thing may melt. Okay? We are stardust. Okay? That's not just a song. What we are and what everything on this planet is ultimately comes from the stars. It's stardust. Okay? Whatever that's constituted by. So, when I have the experience of the desk, if I am made up of the same stuff that the desk is, then it is simply one kind of basic stuff interacting with itself. And what Berkeley chooses to call those things are ideas. The world is not what we take it to be. We experience the world at what we call the macro level. Okay? The world as it is governed by Newton's laws of mechanics. Every event has a cause, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Objects in motion tend to stay in motion, objects at rest tend to stay at rest. Okay? But those laws do not apply at the subatomic level. So the whole world, as we understand it, as we interpret it, is just our human way of making sense of the world so that we can get around in it, so that we can manipulate it and create things and get things done and make it conducive to our comfort. Okay? What Berkeley is doing, really, is putting the burden of proof on the materialist. Saying, if you think the world is made up of a material kind of substance, which is known by us as a representation in the form of ideas, then what is your proof? What's the basis for saying that your experience, which of course is always ideas, what I'm immediately aware of are ideas. What is your basis for saying that those ideas are caused by material things? For Berkeley, the idea of a material world is completely unnecessary. And this is really perhaps the beginning of the phenomenological reduction, which we're going to talk about later. Whatever the world is ultimately made of, doesn't make a difference when it comes to our experience. Whether there is a material world or not, physics is not affected. Because at the macro level, at the level of objects that we interact with, they still follow the same laws. Whether those things are just ideas or whether they are objects existing independent of our ideas of them. So please, go back to the Berkeley Principles of Human Knowledge that I've uploaded and read through it and consider his various arguments for saying that the being of things consists in nothing more than being perceived as ideas. And read the two short selections from Hume. Okay? We'll talk about all that Tuesday, and then Thursday we'll have a quiz over empiricism.